Welcome, everyone. Today's episode, and it's the number 30 of the Global Wisdom Talk, and it's my great pleasure and my honor that I have two exceptional individuals twice, or once again, at the Global Wisdom Talk. On the one hand, Kurt Moosmann, he is joining us from Switzerland, and on the other side is James Hughes, joining us from the United States, from Aspen, Colorado. It could be that you have snow at this time. I don't know. And
we do.
We have a very interesting topic for today. It's on every lip today. That's the $100 trillion wealth transfer. And no surprise, the whole world is talking only and only about the money, and nobody is talking actually the real challenges, the real chances, the real risk, what the individuals and also the family face, but also the societies around the globe are facing now. And that will be our topic for today, to make a deep dive on these real challenges and real risk and real chances also on this $100 trillion wealth transfer. Welcome, Jay. Welcome, Kurt. It's my great pleasure.
Jan, thank you.
So, thank you. I came across a very important topic, and what I recognized through many discussions with advisors on the one hand, but also with family members on the other hand, is a lot of these individuals have no clue, have no orientation, have no answers what this wealth transfer actually means. Ken Koster was pointing out in his book, in its first sentence, this great wealth transfer is a huge transfer of power and influence. And power and influence could be evolving in an integration problem. And I will bring it to you, Jay. Can you describe for us, and maybe you have a deep dive on this, what is actually the integration problem, what each individual families face in this large wealth transfer, what we are facing now?
Well, Jan, first let me say to our audience that they are taking their treasure to take their time to listen, and I want to thank them for that decision to join us. Let me say, first of all, that many years ago, I wrote a book called The Cycle of the Gift, in which I introduced to the literature the concept of a meteor from outer space as the thing that happens to a human being when someone else sends out into space something which they have to integrate. Essentially, every person in the $100 to $120 trillion of the next 50 years, two transfers, will have an integration problem. Yes, they will have an integration problem. I want people to listen very carefully. It isn't something that is native to them. They did not create it. It has nothing actually to do with them existentially. It's nothing to do with them. Someone else did something, took energy and made it matter, which happens infrequently, by the way, in this universe. And they're now receiving a piece of the matter, which is still energy, of course, which they must integrate into their lives. All of history in this field is about integrations. The hero's journey, the heroine's journey, whatever it may be, is always and forever a question. How do I take something created by something else, somebody else, has nothing to do with me, and integrate it into my life so my life continues in flow rather than being interrupted and causing me to fail the integration? That is the problem every human being will have. Now, I had introduced one further thing this morning, and and maybe Kurt would like to add. Some of our great writers, Dennis Jaffe and Jim Grubman, wrote a piece many years ago about the nature of acquirers, all the capital since World War II that's created this $100 million to $120 trillion. And then the question of a native. Oh, isn't this interesting? So when you're the second or third generation receiving a meteor from outer space, you're now becoming a native to the land of capital. But you can never be the acquirer. Now, that doesn't mean you can't create initial capital, but you can't create the acquirer's role. You have to become native. And as these two great men have told us, becoming a native to the land of wealth is very difficult. It's a problem of immigration.
Yes.
Really? Uh-huh.
Kurt, is there anything else what you want to add? What have you seen through your career, through your advisory?
Well, I think you mentioned it, Jan, before, that obviously that power and influence is transferred, but more importantly, in my opinion, next to power and influence is responsibility. That responsibility is transferred, that you basically take on the new role and obviously whatever is bestowed upon you, and use it in a meaningful way. And in my opinion, that also defines, or it will define, the fiduciary responsibility in a totally new way. So, because as we learned, I think in the first session we had together, the fiduciary care really goes beyond the financial capital. And this is really the culmination of all the responsibilities that come together to a generation that is really driven more by emotion than by reason. And I think it is something where they need to try to find a new meaningful way, a new purpose in their livelihood and in their day-to-day activities, and how they basically can take on this huge transfer without being crushed by the sheer size of it. I think that, in addition to what Jay eloquently described, I think this is something, obviously, the generation or the generations that will come about will need to deal with in a very meaningful way, and they need to be trained, and they need to be educated, and they need to be prepared for that.
I would make a little shift in this kind of a discussion. If it comes to this word integration, what kind of process is behind these integration? Just if there are some family members in the audience and say, okay, yeah, I have this integration problem, and now what can I do? Is there just a process behind? Is it just necessary that I need more knowledge, more skills? Jake, can you give us just a little flavor, just an idea, how can we solve these challenge for families for individuals on the matter of integration?
Well, the first thing we must do, as we discussed in our first session with you, is we must remember that the word wealth means well-being.
Yeah.
It does not mean financial capital. No, financial capital is something else. The word wealth, as it derives in English, and by the way, in many other languages, defines well-being. This is a question philosophers and spiritual people have been dealing with for all of centuries. What does it mean to achieve well-being? So I think we could say, first of all, that the integration question successfully integrated has led to that human's well-being. What would well-being consist of? Well, are you spiritually aspiring to something larger than yourself? That's a very important question. As Freud said, are you learning to love and learning to work? Or do you discover how to love, and how do you discover what your vocation is? Can you make good joint decisions? That's social capital, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, philanthropy, but basically, can you make good decisions with the people in your system? Because we're gregarious herd animals. We can't go alone, so we have to make joint decisions. By the way, that means giving up something yourself to get the other person to go along. Oh, that's complicated. Intellectual capital, are we learning like crazy? Are we reading? Are we studying? Are we doing our podcasts? Are we doing our new ways of learning? Are we using AI? Are we asking really great questions? And then human capital, are we thriving as human beings? Are we doing mind, body, spirit work? Are we doing the things? These are the integration questions. Are we achieving well-being by growing our four qualitative selves. By the way, then the quantitative, the financial capital, has a purpose.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, it isn't standing alone in bank accounts and accumulation and power. By the way, Kurt, power over rather than power to. Oh my goodness, there's a huge difference between power over and power to and what happens in the world. But the financial capital now has a purpose. Grow your aspirations, grow your ability to make decisions in the world for you, your family, and the world itself. Grow your intellectual capacities, find vocation, learn, use AI, and thrive as a human being. That's the integration question. And by the way, as you achieve higher and higher orders of well-being, as the great philosophers and spiritual people have told us, you move further into the flow of your life rather than the impediments that financial capital alone create. So I will say one more thing. In fairness to every person in the world who receives a meteor from outer space in this $100 to $120 trillion over the next 50 years receives burdens with it.
Yeah.
The question is, can they transform it to blessings? But to say naively it isn't a burden is just not to tell the truth. It is a burden. You have to do something that you would not otherwise do with something somebody else created. So we have to be very honest and to our people who are receiving these meteors, look, this is a burden. We'll try to help you if you'd like our help to make it a blessing, but we're not going to be naive or have you be naive and because you keep saying to us, darn it, I'm not so sure I like having this.
I think the matter that Jay just basically alluded to is fundamentally important because this is what nowadays, especially the current wealth owners, spend very little time on, and I see that in my daily practice, and many have written books about it. That is mindfulness and trying to find a holistic approach to what really human beings ought to be thinking about, how they should act, and to think about a greater purpose in life. And when you now have this conflict that wealth is transferred from one generation, which is very rationally driven, to a new generation that is more mindful and is looking at a greater good and of the well-being of a family, the way you try to basically capture the best possible way of transferring responsibility so that the burden that Jay just alluded to doesn't really crush you, but you see it as an opportunity, as almost as an enlightenment to do new good things with it. Then both generations have to be synchronized. The generation now needs to understand what the future burden, what the future responsibility will look like. And the next generation of or wealth owners will then basically need to capture the essence of what is expected by them so that there's no disruption between the generations. And then you bring them together, and I call it synchronicity of wealth transfers, because you need to basically look at the two stages, the current and the future. And the other point, which I really love about what Jay just mentioned, and I think that's really important for our listeners, is it's been proven in the past, going back, we were speaking about it amongst ourselves. You can go to the Egyptians, you can go to the Romans, you can go to all different larger cultures, meaningful dynasties, that at the end, you need to create something new and you have to reinvent yourself in order to continue on blossom. This is really, truly important. No family has been able to nurture and to live from an existing pot of whatever asset it may be it grains in the past, money today, Bitcoins tomorrow. It doesn't matter. At the end, there has to be a purpose of driving it to a new meaning, making it using the asset, the intellectual, the social, the human capital to really create something new. And this is really, I think, one of the biggest responsibilities the current generation has, to be able to convey that message to the next generation, to the new wealth owners, so that they can prepare themselves and that they can take on that responsibility with dignity, with responsibility, with humility, but also with a vision and a clear purpose on what they want to do going forward.
Kurt, that's beautiful. Jen, could I just pick up this?
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
One of the things I'm trying to help my world understand is into whose hands existentially and philosophically is this wealth financial capital transfer going to go? It's not going to the greatest generation. It's not going to the silent generation. It's not going to the baby boomers. And most of it's not going to Gen X. These are terms I think universally now people have studied from Strauss and Howe, and we use them loosely, but they're very helpful because they help us define a mindset. These huge financial capital transfers, not wealth, remember, financial capital transfers, are going to millennials and Gen Z and probably some to whatever the new name of the youngest group are.
Yes.
What has defined so far the millennials and the Gen Zs? Anxiety. All over the world. They're the anxiety generation. I'm not going to be a social historian and guess why, but I have a feeling, Jan, with a group of listeners like you put together, they all know why. They're the parents and grandparents of these generations, or maybe they're the generations themselves. When we ask the how question, how can we help them integrate, which is where you're leading us, I just like to say this on their behalf. They don't want to read a book. They don't want a memorandum, and they don't want a balance sheet. What say your listeners? But that's what they have to have. No, that's what they have to be financially literate. But it has nothing to do with wealth as well-being. Nothing. Now, by the way, if you're a greatest generation, or if you're a silent generation, or a baby boomer, you wanted a book, you wanted a memo, and you wanted a balance sheet. Your children and grandchildren do not. What they want is an experience.
Yes.
You say, what does that mean? You don't know, dear friends. You don't know what it means because it doesn't mean to you what it means to them.
Yes.
So if you want flow, if you want the burden to become a blessing and you're interested in their integration, the question for this morning, then you have to ask, well, what are the experiences that they're asking for? And I'm just going to touch one or two of them, by the way, that can help. Just be very direct for the moment. If you don't know how each person in your family learns, then you can't make a journey together. Because you can't know when you make decisions together whether each of you got materials in the form that you can best use them. Very, very basic. You don't know how each other learns. By the way, your trustees and your family office executives as well need to know how you learn, and you need to know how they learn so you get the materials that you need in the form you can best assimilate them. Well, that's pretty basic, Jay. Very, very basic if your family's going to go on a long journey. If you don't receive the materials in the way you can best integrate them, then you're defeating your intellectual, human, and social selves. I won't go into some other techniques. I'm just starting with something very, very basic on purpose to say there are tools available, but they're not financial literacy tools.
Yes. Yes.
They're tools about how people have experiences of learning that enable them to assimilate and integrate things into their lives.
Yeah.
So Kurt.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because it's really, I mean, you're opening up a huge box of wisdom that I think could be of essence and of value to the listeners. I want to mention two points in addition to what you just said. One of them is or actually three. The future generations of future wealth owners need to be able to think more holistically. Therefore, they have to become more mindful.
Right.
Therefore, they need to be trained and they need to be sensitized in a way that they understand what the true purpose of life is. That is absolutely key, and this takes a long time. So you have to start today, not tomorrow, today, in starting to understand who you are, who you want to become, and what your purpose in life will be. This is absolutely key because that will define the role that you play in the future in what you are going to be doing with whatever is bestowed upon you. That is point one. Point two, I think, is, in my opinion, really important because you mentioned family offices. You mentioned families as such. I will continue on saying entrepreneurial wealth. So when you all of a sudden talk about the wealth owners and they comprise of operational entities, you have third parties involved, you have directors, independent directors, non-family member directors involved. They need to understand that role. They need to understand and be part of that transition process because otherwise you lose them on the way and there will be frictions between the family, the business, and the owners. And the third point, I think, which is really a narrative I really feel needs to be looked at is the principal agency issue. The principal agent problem that always rules over family-owned enterprises and family offices, and in general within families, will have to be redefined. Yes. What is the fiduciary relationship? What is the agency's role? How far do we go in becoming part of that decision-making process? And that synchronicity between the generations and understanding that you have to look at it from a more holistic point of view. That takes a lot of training, and it's not part of the curriculum that you learn at the university as we speak. So the mindset of shifting to a much higher good, of higher well-being, has to be an intrinsic part of the education program. And that starts at the very fundamental beginnings of secondary school, of college, of universities, making sure that they're aware what it really means when they one day will enter that role. Because in some cases, it happens very quickly if you have a death in the family. And in some cases, it appears that it never actually happens at all. And they will be drawn into an event of duress. So this is really what I think people need to be aware of. And spend and invest time in yourself. This is one of my biggest suggestions and recommendations I have for families. Spend time with yourself. Understand who you are, who you want to become, and what your true purpose is. Don't make the favor to the family to do what they want you to do. Do what you feel your calling is. And in order to get there, you need to spend time with yourself and be able to be true to yourself. And only then will you be able to be in a position to be humble, educated, and calm enough to take on the burden and to convey it, as Jay beautifully said, into a blessing. Because that takes a huge amount of energy. And that energy has to be positive. It has to be constructive. It has to be creative. And that is something I believe the listeners should really be aware of, and they should start today and not tomorrow, because that's where, in my opinion, most mistakes are made.
Yes.
Kurt, so beautifully said. And let me pick up that two themes and then see what the next question Jan has. First, let me remind the listeners that their emphasis on their children and grandchildren's educations in STEM is sterile from everything Kurt just said. Just please remember that you're encouraging the STEM education is a box canyon from which the person does not discover anything about him or herself. It's not intended that they know about themselves. It's intended that they can operate a computer successfully and count. That's very, very important. And the second part of this is something that Freud said that I think can again give us a way of looking, Kurt and Jan. Freud, as an old man, made an observation about the people he found in his practice who were most adjusted. And Jan, as you know, and Kurt knows, he couldn't use the word happiness. Freud couldn't use an Aristotelian idea of happiness or a Buddhist idea of happiness or a Lao Tzu. He just couldn't bring himself. So he used the word adjusted. But he meant happiness and well-being, as we're discussing it this morning. Now, if we go beyond those words to what Freud actually said, it's really interesting. He said, I'm going to use happiness. The happiest people he met were those who learned to love. That's very learned to love, by the way. It's very interesting. You can't learn that from a STEM education, by the way. And as Kurt was saying so beautifully. And then he said, and those who learned to work, by which he meant vocation, vocare, the Latin, not labore, labor, but vocare. Learning to love and learning to work. Pretty darn useful way to imagine how to be a human being. And then he said, by the way, that sex, by which he also meant gender, and money were the two greatest interferers. Isn't that fascinating? We're talking about money this morning, financial capital. And then here's what he said. He said, money is the most difficult because no nice person will speak of it. Was he wise? Wow. And practical. Wow. 4 quadrants. Like, are my children, grandchildren learning to love? Are they learning to work? Wow. Can they deal with sex and gender? And can they deal with money and integrate them into the learning to love and the work? Man was wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have so many tools available to us, so many wise things, but STEM doesn't enable any of those things to enter into one's life. It's tragic. Over to you, Jan.
That's Jan, yes. If I can just maybe just make an additional point to what Jay just beautifully said. Let's not forget that the future wealth owners, very often we spoke about the burden, but they also have the feeling, to a certain degree, absolutely correctly, that they are acting in a restricted, confined area. Mm-hmm. And the more they basically deal with themselves, the more they deal with these topics we're just basically discussing, they will gain freedom.
That's right.
And the freedom will give them the power to decide wisely in a more accurate way, giving them not a guarantee, but a higher probability of succeeding on how they will go. And that matter of freedom is something you have to earn yourself. And freedom will come with the higher spiritual education that goes in with the more traditional STEM education that we're speaking about today. And I think this is really important.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's much appreciated that you both have pointed out very, very important points and beautiful points. And I will use this just as a bridge, and if we can use the second half of our talk today to make an outlook. And the outlook is just, I will come up with a quote, and it's very easy. It's what got us here won't get us there. What I mean by this is just, I mean, we have the families on the one side and we have the advisors on the other side. And from my point of view, we need also in a redefinition of the advisors itself, but also to come up with, maybe it's a little bit provocative, all these complex things, what we are bringing into families, governance. I mean, I use often the term, ask 10 people what governance actually is, and maybe you will get 30 or 50 responses on that. Is it just the question that it is our responsibility to serve these new generation just even better, to come more trained itself in systems thinking, to implement architectures into the families, because the family itself will be also, I mean, restructured in a new way, because the family tomorrow have very little in common with the family today and also in the past. And I mean, this $100 trillion wealth transfer is the first huge wave. And the next wave is waiting around the corner. It's expecting, I've done my own observation, between 2040 and 2045, it is estimated $200 trillion is moving from one generation to the next. And there's a great risk that many families will implode, will disappear on this wealth transfer itself, through conflicts, through divorces, stuff like that. Coming back to my point, is it just also up to us to come up with in fresh thinking, rethinking, in governance, in systems thinking, implementing systems into families, if these new generation, that is my experience, they are moving into the question how we can structure our family just as an institution, more professionalized, stuff like that. Not all, but few. Is this just also your perception? And can you give us, you both just in flavor, what is your idea? How we can solve these very important issues also from the advisor world to serve the families more better?
Well, Kurt, if I may I go first?
Yes, go ahead.
Jan, let me say what the first requirement of the new advisor is. It is the same requirement of a great number two seeking to make a great number one greater than he or she would be. This is the question of advice through all of human history. All of human history. There's nothing new.
Yes.
The key issue for the advisor is, are you prepared to provide courage, not simply knowledge? History teaches us this over and over and over again. Many years ago, I wrote a little paper on the personne de confiance. I like the French better than the English, because I thought the personne d'affaires was an interesting idea, but also personne d'affaires do is fulfill needs and provide knowledge. This is sterile, and a sterile life, by the way, for the advisor, and doesn't really help much. It gets you into all of the messes and the nesting of the systems that don't work that you just talked about. The great personnes de confiance of history have provided courage to their clients, because the clients know how to make the decisions, by the way, but they lack the courage to do so.
Yes.
So I think if we understand our role, it is historically written for us. Now, by the way, let me just say to the advisors who begin to think about providing courage, you better understand that, like St. Thomas More, you can lose your head. Let's be very clear. Or like Seneca, Nero can tell you out and tell you hang yourself. Great number ones, or not so great number ones, are not so happy, Henry VIII or Nero, with being provided with courage. So we have to be, but this is what our profession is about and has always been about.
Yes.
Now, will there be novel issues? Of course there will be, cultural, social, novel issues. But now let me say to our audience what the antidote for all time is. Can you make good joint decisions? Let me just remind us again, we are not single animals, we are herd animals. We cannot live in society without making joint decisions. We have to find people to go on the journey with. Yes. By the way, Jan, one of the complexities of family, we'll just throw this in now, is the one-child family is going to be dominant because of the modern demography. One-child family, well, that's a family? Of course it is. They will couple or in some way create a system for joint decision-making, because they can't go alone either.
Yes.
They just may not have siblings to go with. Who knows? Maybe that's better or not. We don't know. It's entirely open, but boy, the next 50 years, we're going to find out about that. Maybe the Chinese have something to teach us because of the one-child policy. That's something worth going and studying. But quickly saying this, the social capital of a family is its ability to make joint decisions. Yes, there may be acting philanthropically in society and being good agents, hyper agents, as Kurt was saying, of course. But basically, you are at the risk of the quality of your decisions, not the quantity of them.
Yeah.
So if you have advisors, choose advisors who are interested in providing you with the courage to make the decision you know you need to make, but the more difficult one, who will stand with you with the consequences of that decision. That's the advisor you're looking for, not someone who tells you what to do. Forget that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So totally useless. No, you're looking for the advisor who says, well, what is the issue in front of you? And by the way, I need to know what your aspirations are, as Kurt was saying, as a human being. I need to know what inspires you. And will you perspire with the decision you make to make it come true?
Yeah.
But you're seeking an advisor for all times, the man for all seasons, or the woman for all seasons. I want to be very careful and be patriarchs. It's a person for all seasons. Let's be very clear. What we're asking some is, come with me on the journey of the next 10 to 20 years, the next major transitions in my family. Come along with me. If you yourself feel you will learn who you are meant to be in this lifetime, that's the advisor's question. Who am I? Who am I meant to be? And then ask yourself, am I prepared to provide knowledge? Yes, that's easy. But am I really prepared to stand in with this group of people as they make decisions and be with them with the consequences of those decisions?
Yeah.
And will I encourage in heart, and couragio in heart, will I encourage the more complex decision that meet the cultural and social and political issues of their time? And by the way, if I may say this, to those in the millennials and Gen Z, as I said earlier, for whom anxiety is their curse and yet their issue, you more than anyone deserve advisors who care about you, care about you, care about you.
Yes. What a great point. What a great point.
It's difficult to add something to the last sentence because it really basically encompasses everything we just said, right? What a beautiful summary. But I'd like to maybe nevertheless try to add 2-3 comments to this. Jay spoke about courage and more than knowledge. I would add trust more than knowledge. There has been a study recently that came out about families choosing their proper advisors. Are you more interested in getting skilled people or trustworthy people? And guess what happened, right? So I think the level of trust, going back to the comment we did, and in the first session we had together, we spoke about the consigliere, as they call it in Italy, or basically the confiance. It's really confiance. It's trust. It's going back to the basics of being able to act as an authentic mirror to the family, and giving them basically to raise the right questions, not to answer them necessarily, and not to tell them how to do it, like Jay eloquently said, but to raise the right question. Just to give you in parentheses, I happen to be the president of the Swiss Single Family Office Association, as you know, Jan. And we're actually writing a code of conduct for family offices, exactly also addressing what we're discussing today. And we're not basically telling them what to do, but at least to ask themselves the questions um, in order to make the right decisions, because every family and every person and every individual is different. And one answer might be the right one for one and might be wrong for the other. And that is making people aware of what they need to ask themselves to make and to go the next step. And I think what I also would like to say, because you mentioned what is the future going to bring? You know, at the end of the day, I really believe that typical advisors have the tendency to make things more complex, because the more complex they become, the more they can charge.
Yes.
It's a little nasty, but it's pretty much the way it works. In my opinion, the beauty of advisory lies in the simplicity. Now, there will always be a certain degree of complexity given the mobility of the family, where they stem from, what the culture is, how they're diverse they are, and what the businesses are they might have. But it's always been like that. In the philosophy, in the ancient histories, someone who can actually explain to you a complex matter in simple terms has really understood what he wants to do.
Absolutely.
And what he wants to convey as a message to the family. And so it's really important to understand in simple terms, what are the key questions that you have to ask yourself? And then to take it in a baby step methodology down the road, always giving you also the freedom and the opportunity to go back and to revisit the decisions that you've taken. Because as you learn from mistakes, and that's also one very important, maybe last point I want to add, understanding, contrary to the typical civil world that we're living in, at least here in the central part of Europe, understanding that there has to be a failure, that there has to be a culture of failure, meaning that you're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to learn from mistakes. You're not going to be thrown into the pit because you've made a mistake. And this is a big difference between where Jay lives and where I'm currently sitting in. The two cultures are so different, yet we have similar values. But in North America, you're allowed to make a mistake. You're going to be thrown into the pit, but you're going to be, if you lift yourself up, you're going to be carried away. A lot of people here in our time zone are afraid that if they make a mistake, they will basically be drawn from the landscape forever. And that's why they don't dare to do anything new. And this is something we need to teach the Gen Zs and the Millennials and the future wealth owners, because at the end, they're only holding it primarily for the next generation to come.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Kurt and Jen, a couple of things come up in the beautiful on the advisor question and the way that Kurt has framed it. Let me say, first of all, that if your family is contemplating having a family office, a private trust company, some kind of management vehicle, if it's not qualitative, don't do it.
Right.
Almost all of these offices, thousands of them around the world, are being born by wealth creators, that is financial capital. I want to be very clear, not wealth as well-being, financial capital creators needing estate management services for themselves. That's not a family office, that's a founder's office. Let me get the language very, very clear. It is not a family office, it is a founder office. If that office is to evolve to a family office, it must become qualitative, not quantitative. And now people are saying, what's he talking about? Well, let me remind you, those who took chemistry, it takes 3 quantities to equal 1 quality. Quality is where you're going. Quantity gets you there. So the advisors of the future, as in the past, have been the great ones, the personnes de confiance, the consigliere, however we define them, have been about the qualitative experience for themselves and the families they serve.
Yes. Yes.
It isn't now. Let me also say something very practical for people that are listening. So what's he talking about? The first generation, the founder generation, takes energy and makes it matter. It is a creative action. When that matter or some piece of it as a meteor flows into the rising generation, no next, by the way, the rising generation, its problem ever after is dynamic regeneration, not creation. What did he say? Yes, the problem of the natives is dynamic regeneration. Think about the words, not preservation. No, that's formaldehyde and you die from it. No, dynamic action, lots of energy, but regeneration.
Yes.
That's a qualitative problem.
Yeah.
That has a quantitative consequence. And let me come all the way back to this little piece we're talking about. If the family can't make good joint decisions, and these are more complex decisions than the easy ones, and it doesn't have the courage with the advisor to make the more difficult conversations, it isn't acting qualitatively. And let me say again, it takes three quantities to make one quality. Isn't the math fascinating?
Absolutely.
I think Jan, Jay just put a finger on the dot, because I think it's really important also to remind our listeners that the rising generation has to be part of the decision-making process. So the question then becomes, when do you bring him into the decision-making process? When do you bring him onto the family board? When do you take him into the family council? And generically, it's always important to say, do it as early as possible. And even if they just sit in and listen, the more you listen, the more you learn, the more you're going to be equipped to be in a position to take the right decisions as they're called upon you.
Yes.
And Kurt, here's a key to those listeners who are asking, well, who leads in the rising generation? Let me tell you, it is not the person you would select to run your business.
Exactly.
It's a qualitative person who will take the whole system, as Jan has said, and the joint decision-making system and discover the aspirations of all the people in that decision that bear that on that decision. It's the fiduciary leader that you're imagining, Kurt. It's the quiet leader. It's the leader from behind. It's the Taoist leader that the Chinese teach us so magnificently about from Lao Tzu, who, when asked who was the greatest leader, said, the one whose followers say we did it ourselves. Oh, listeners, if you spend an hour after this conversation asking you who the great leader is, consider Lao Tzu's gift. The great leader is the one whose followers say we did it ourselves. That's Chinese wisdom for all times, for all people everywhere. But
and
the
it's
one
wisdom
you
for sorry, Jay, go ahead.
yeah, I would know. I was just going to repeat, Kurt, that the one you might choose to lead the business is a Confucian leader from in front.
Yeah.
But we need, for a family, all the boats have to rise so that everyone gets into the next generation in good shape, learning to love, learning to work, managing sex, management, all the things we're talking about this morning. You need a different leader.
Yes.
Which is so very true also for conflict management, right?
Yes.
And that is
Yes.
and so you don't want to have a family rise within conflict. But if you do have one, that's exactly the solution you need to look at.
Yeah. So look, I'm not being woolly here. None of us are. Think for the moment, dear listeners, who you want to help with the joint decision-making process so that all the boats rise. People ask me, what would be success? I always say having a fifth generation and going on from there, the way the great indigenous people have understood fifth generation thinking. But being for today very direct, can you say in your system all the boats are rising?
Yeah.
That's a very good basic question, isn't it? Very simple. Very complicated answer, but very simple. Are all my boats rising?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I also think that if we talk about the indigenous people, I might want to just end that note on stating that the indigenous people consider themselves as part of the earth. And so
yes,
you come from the earth and you go back into the earth. And I think it's important for everyone, us included, that we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're just there to merely facilitate the entire process and to help and to assist, to ask the nasty questions, the questions typically people want to avoid, and to be there to help them find the right answers.
And less to care.
That's true.
And exactly.
And before we come to, we had a lot of points to discuss for hours, maybe also for days. And I will end our discussion for today just with a little experience what I had a couple of months ago. And I met just a family member, and he said to me, Jan, listen, if you want to advise families and you want to take them on a journey, first, what you want to do is make your journey in yourself first. Go on a journey first with yourself, and then you can take me on a journey. And that is just my closing remark for today, and that should be also maybe a signal for colleagues out there. And so it was my great pleasure, and I've learned a lot from you, Kurt, and also from you, Jay. And once again, it is necessary that we spread out the word, that we can help families to go on a long journey for more than fifth generations, but also that the word is heard, and all these wisdom and all these tips and inspirations are placed on the right place. Many, many thanks for your time, both, and I look forward to continuing our discussion near on.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Kurt. It's a great
privilege.
Thank you,
Jay. Thank you.